Hello and welcome to the next episode of my tutorial series Subtractive Synthesis on various synthesizers. So far we've covered the major sections of a synthesizer and we've attempted to use them building one on top of the other to create sounds. We've gone all the way from the oscillator section through to the effects section covering the entire signal flow. What we're going to do today is go back and revisit the oscillator section, this time of a slightly more advanced synthesizer, to see just how far we can go. The way we're going to do that is, rather than using the filter and the effects to make more interesting sounds, we're going to see how much headway we can make using only the mixer and the oscillator section to control the sounds. So let's start by diving in and looking at what exactly we have on this synthesizer. So we have the oscillator section consisting of 3 oscillators, the mixer section which includes noise and ring mods, the filter section which we're going to try and do without today, the envelopes up here, the LFOs up here, the effect section down here, and access to all of the deeper functions available there. So we've initialized the patch. Let's listen to what we have. So we can hear that the initialized patch is very, very bright. Effectively, we have the filter open fully, resonance down. I'm just going to set these knobs to match what we would expect the settings to be like. Up. So now the panel is at something like an initialized patch. So far we only have oscillator 1 playing. So let's experiment with the options that we have available for this oscillator, and then let's dig into ways in which we can get more interesting sounds without using the filter and without using the effects. Hopefully this will mean when we do add those parts of the synthesizer, we'll be able to get more interesting and more useful sounds. One of the things that I think is going to be helpful to know is that the LFOs by default will run indefinitely, but it is possible to use them more like envelopes. So let's go into the LFO section and we can see that at the moment this is the phase that the envelope starts on. So we can have it start at its 0° phase or various phases through the cycle. If we're using it as an envelope, this is going to be very useful. We can adjust the fade in. So we can have the envelope, or the LFO intensity fade in or out as the note starts playing, as the gate closes, as the release phase starts, and so on. Fade sync means key syncing the phase. It doesn't really matter to us in this case. We have an option to make the LFOs common, which means that the LFOs across all the voices will match, so they'll behave like global LFOs, of which there are 2. And we have repeat. This is the thing that interests me the most. So with repeat, we can have an LFO, when we play a note, repeat up to a certain number of times. So if we set the LFO repeat on LFO 1 to 1, then the LFO, I don't know if you could see, it came in and it did 1 cycle. So let me switch it to a saw wave. Let me turn the rate up. So I hope you can see that flashes and then fades out. So what I've been able to do here is effectively turn this envelope into an LFO. Another thing that I can do if I want is I can slew limit that. So what that means is, what slew limit is when you have a signal that is varying, it moves at a certain rate. Slew limiting sets an upper limit on how rapidly the signal's level can move, meaning that if it tries to move faster than that, it will be curved and slowed down. So if I slew limit this, you'll see at the moment it has a very sharp attack. I'll put slew limit right up. I don't know if you can see that it's not very obvious from looking at it, but it softens the attack there. So we've actually just made ourselves an extra envelope. So now we have 1, 2, 3, 4 envelopes. Now, oscillator section, what we're here to talk about. There are 5 modes available for the oscillator. First is sine, then triangle, saw, square, and more. So what more does is bring you to a page on the menu here. And what this is allowing me to do is to select more waveforms, and these are actually wavetables. So let me scroll through. So you might think, well, wavetables give us a good opportunity to add some movement here because we can animate through those wavetables. But it turns out that all of the oscillator types on this synthesizer have a shape parameter. So let me experiment with the sine wave. Let me move it all the way to one end. So I think you can hear when you go in the anti-clockwise direction, we get something that sounds a bit more square wave. When we go in the clockwise direction, we get something that sounds a bit more saw wave. But in any case, it's adding harmonics. Let's try the triangle. So you get an almost sync-like sound as you move up and down on the triangle. I suspect it's a similar sort of like a super saw, but for the triangle. Let's go to the saw. So this is definitely sounding like a super saw. So there's like a second copy of the saw wave detuned from the first, and these are diverging from one another. So we have, and now they've come together in the other wave. Okay, so we have a range there. The pulse wave, square, and pulse. So an interesting thing you may note, when I turn this down to 0, we have access to a pulse width, the duty cycle of 0. So this is something which is a feature people often quite like. The reason they quite like it is it allows you to animate the shape of the pulse wave, and at one extent you get no sound. So using a rhythmically synced LFO, we have access to rhythmic sounds within the oscillator section. So those are the shapes there. Note that on the panel we can route the mod envelope and the LFO directly there, as well as these pitch routings. Let's listen to a few of the wavetables. So let me just skip through and listen. So let's listen to this one called Tubi. So I guess you can hear there that in animating through that wavetable, we have access to some potentially interesting sounds. So what I'm going to try and do then is I've made LFO1 into something that's logically like an envelope. I'm going to use LFO1 to negatively modulate the wavetable position. Let me slow it down. So you can hear what we've got going on here is some sort of animation in that transient. I'm using the LFO, but by all means I could also set the LFO modulation amount to 0. I could use mod envelope 1. So let's try that out. So I think we already have a slightly more interesting movement of the sound by virtue of this animation. I chose to have the manual amount set to maximum and then animate negatively. I can animate positively and set the manual amount this way. So in this case, because the envelope is falling, when it reaches 0, it will reach whatever level I set the manual amount to be. So now let's add some amplitude envelope here. So the amplitude envelope is going to let us, rather than have that sound drag on indefinitely, shape it a little. So let's think about how we might want it to look. So I feel like a little velocity sensitivity would help here. So let's pick an amount. Okay, so we've got now a movement in the timbra that occurs as the note plays. Make it a bit slower. So let's think about another movement that we would like to see here. A thing which I think could be quite interesting is adding more of a transient at the beginning. Maybe we could even have a transient that is made of noise. So let's think about that. So in order to have a transient come in like that, I'm going to need a way to animate this. So the way that I'm going to animate it is use the other mod envelope. So the mod envelope shape that I'm going to pick is going to be just a very small attack. And what I'm going to do in the modulation matrix is set the noise level following mod envelope 2. So at the moment, I feel like the noise is a bit too bright, it's a bit abrasive, the tick is a little too loud. So what can I do about that? Well, I actually have the capacity to filter the noise. Okay, I think that's already reasonably interesting, but I think perhaps we would like this to happen more or less depending on the velocity. So let's add a second source, which is going to be velocity. So now we have a little transient added there. We're still only using one of the oscillators, we're also not using the ring mod. Let's experiment with what the ring mod can do for us. So the ring mod applies between oscillator 1 and 2. So I'm going to turn oscillator 1 all the way down. Let's listen to oscillator 2, I'll give it a triangle wave. Now let's listen to the ring mod. So I feel like the ring mod gives us an interesting timbre. Let's try detuning oscillator 2. Okay, so what I'm thinking would be nice is that ring modded sound. I would like some of that to come in. And I'd like that to come in only transiently at the beginning of the sound. So I'm going to turn the ring mod down. I'm going to go to my modulation matrix. I'm going to use LFO1 in unipolar mode, which means that it is only going to modulate the value up. In bipolar mode, the plus minus, it will both modulate up and down. So unipolar mode, and what I'm going to adjust is the ring mod level. So I'm going to go find the ring mod level in here. This is my main oscillator. the same way as I did previously, I'd like velocity sensitivity there. So what I'm going to do is turn this up a little bit and turn the velocity sensitivity down a bit. Okay, so I think that's interesting. Now I'm going to look for a way to add a little bit more timbral interest here. One of the ways to do that would be to bring in another oscillator. So we have the second oscillator working with the ring mod. I have the possibility to bring a little bit of that in, which I might do. And now oscillator 3 is going to give me access to potentially another timbra, maybe in a different register, maybe not. So let's just listen to oscillator 3. Let me turn these down for now, I'll leave that there. So what we have here is a saw wave, combined with a little bit of this ring mod, because we have that set to velocity sensitive, and a little bit of this transient noise that we have. In itself, I quite like this tone, but I think it's a little over the top. It's a little too strong. So what I might do is, so what I'm going to experiment with is modulating the shape by both the mod envelope and the LFO. So let's try. Okay, so I quite like that tone. So one possibility here is we have access to frequency modulation. So we can modulate the frequency of oscillator 1 with the frequency of oscillator 3. So without hearing oscillator 3, without hearing the third oscillator, we have the opportunity to modulate. Now this can be very, very strong in the way that it sounds, so I'm going to have to be delicate with the amount that I use. Oscillator 3 to oscillator 1. Okay, so let's make this a little velocity sensitive. Okay, so I think that's interesting. I might try and bring in a little of this raw oscillator sound. Okay, so I think what we've achieved here is a sound which is reasonably interesting. Maybe there's some more movement that we could do with. Maybe there's some more timbral interest that can be extracted, but I think that you can hear that without actually going to the filter section, we've already been able to create a relatively usable sound. We've only used a small number of the modulation slots. If we needed to, we haven't actually used the second LFO. I could turn this second LFO into a fifth envelope if I wanted. We have also two global LFOs available to us, neither of which I've used. So this LFO 3 and LFO 4. So we have a number of modulation sources available, and we have two entire sections which I haven't touched, nor have I actually gone in to adjust the gain staging. So I would say that what we have here is a demonstration that it's easy to imagine that the oscillator section is just the start of your sound design process. But from my perspective, the more that you can extract from each section in your synthesizer, the more you can get in total. So think about timbral complexity just in the oscillator section. Think about movement and interest using the mixer section. Then think about, how do we dial that back? How do we control that movement? How do we temper what we have in the filter section? How do we accent that? How do we add additional interest to the sound using the effect section? And remember, these effects, from my perspective, are used as sound design effects. I'm not using these from a mix perspective. If I want a reverb at the mix level, that will be a send on my mixer, or that will be a setting in my DAW. Okay, so I think that I've demonstrated what I want to demonstrate. I'm going to come back in the next episode and revisit modulations. So you can see that I've been using modulations quite a lot here, but I'm hoping to demonstrate a bit more of the depth that can be achieved there. Okay, so thank you very much for watching. I hope that you've enjoyed this episode. I hope you come back for some more episodes. In any case, thank you and goodbye.